I grew up in a place where silence was a foreign concept. The cacophony of neighboring arguments, my father's hammer striking wood, and their frequent disputes filled every corner of our small house. The walls were too thin for secrets, and the pervasive smell of dampness mingled with stale coffee clung stubbornly to the air. This was my world, and I felt acutely aware of its limitations. My father always stressed the necessity of hard work to escape this life. He was a mason, spending his days toiling on construction sites, returning home with calloused hands and weary eyes. His profession was etched onto his face, in the stoop of his shoulders, and in the harsh words he used when speaking to me and my brother, Tiago. I knew he loved us, but his affection manifested primarily in complaints about money and warnings about the harsh realities of a life lived in poverty. Tiago, on the other hand, was fundamentally different. A book always at his side, he believed education was the sole path to a better future. His concern for me, sometimes expressed in a way that irritated me, was evident in his words. "Larissa, you are more than this. Study, take a course, don't let your beauty be your only focus." I would always avert my gaze, feeling as though he misunderstood my perspective. To me, the world was a simple equation. Money dictated power, and those without it were destined to obey. From a young age, my appearance drew attention. It wasn't a conscious choice, but an inescapable fact. Boys at school were restless in my presence, and even the older neighbors made comments that left me feeling uncomfortable. My mother would say I should embrace this attribute. "You are beautiful, my dear. Enjoy it, it's a gift." But to me, beauty was not a gift, but a commodity, something I could perhaps use to acquire a better life. Our home was a cramped space, with poorly painted walls and a cold concrete floor. The wind whistled through the gaps in the windows, and on rainy days, the scent of damp earth permeated everything. There was no room for dreams in that environment. Every penny that came in was meticulously accounted for. Food was basic, and the future remained shrouded in uncertainty. I knew my father did his best, but the feeling of being trapped in a relentless cycle was suffocating. Conflicts between my father and Tiago were common. My brother yearned for education and a different future, but my father believed he should focus on working to support the family. I was caught in the middle, listening to their arguments without taking sides. Sometimes Tiago would urge me to strive for more, but I lacked his unwavering faith. Studying seemed so distant, so futile, given the reality I observed around me. Yet, there were moments of fantasy. Watching actresses on television, I imagined a life of elegance, beautiful clothes, parties, and travel. It wasn't a lofty aspiration, but it was the only one I possessed. When Tiago encouraged me to seek something greater, I understood his point, but it wasn't enough to propel me to change. Time passed, and I remained in the same place. Tiago fought. For his future, my father continued working until his strength ebbed, and I simply existed, waiting for something, or someone, to alter my trajectory. The only certainty I held was that I did not want to die in that house. At 18, I began working at a clothing store. It wasn't just any store. It was one frequented by the affluent, with expansive windows and mannequins that seemed more elegant than anyone I knew. The entrance was permeated with the scent of expensive perfumes and fine fabrics, creating an aura of another world entirely. It was my first job, and I knew that at least there, I could feel a sliver of the life I had always envisioned. I stood behind the counter, folding clothes and assisting customers. Most of those who entered barely acknowledged my presence. They were impeccably dressed men and women, people who appeared to live without concern. Initially, this bothered me. Seeing such wealth while I had to count coins to pay for my bus ride, home was like a slap in the face. But with time, I began to view the situation differently. Perhaps this was the place where I could change my fortune. It was there that I met Renato. He was a tall, well-dressed man with a calming voice that seemed to fill the space. He frequented the store almost every week at various times, always purchasing expensive clothing. I assumed he was a lawyer or a businessman, someone of importance. He claimed the purchases were for his wife, but each time he mentioned her, I noticed a flicker in his eyes, as if the idea of marriage wasn't as fulfilling as it should be. Renato, a customer unlike the others, possessed a gentle demeanor. He consistently smiled when I served him, inquiring about my day. Simple gestures that made me feel seen. Initially, I didn't dwell on it. He was just another customer. However, over time, I began to notice him more closely. The way he adjusted his wristwatch while waiting for his change, the way he looked at me as if trying to convey something unspoken. Renato was different. Deep down, I knew he sensed something unique about me as well. While attending to him, I often found myself contemplating a life with someone like him by my side. He seemed to embody everything I had always desired: security, comfort, stability. I knew he was married, yet this knowledge failed to diminish the notions that blossomed in my mind. I couldn't help but fantasize. Poverty had a cruel way of fostering dreams of things that seemed unattainable. A particular day stands out. Renato inquired about my name. Unlike other customers who asked out of obligation, he pronounced my name slowly, almost as if tasting the syllables. When he left the store, my heart quickened, and a peculiar thought crossed my mind. Perhaps he was my opportunity. Returning home that evening, everything felt more constricting, more challenging. My father argued with Tiago about money. The aroma of simple meals filled the air, and I felt suffocated. The stark contrast between the shop's world and my home felt unbearable. While listening to the argument, I couldn't help but focus on Renato and what he represented. Not just a wealthy man, but a possibility. I didn't yet know how, but something within me began to shift. Renato transcended the role of a customer. He became an idea, a symbol of all that I could have if I played my cards right. I can't articulate what happened that day, but something within me fractured. Arriving home after work, I encountered the familiar scene. My father seated at the table, his brow furrowed, and Tiago beside him, attempting calculations with an old calculator. The scent of simple, almost flavorless food filled the air, but there was no comfort at that table. Only exhaustion. It was then that I realized I could no longer endure. While listening to my father complain about a late bill and Tiago try to appease him, I found myself thinking about Renato. He could never know what it was like. He would never have to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying medicine. My mind drifted, imagining what it would be like to be by his side, to escape that endless cycle of poverty. I knew I had to do something. And that's when I thought of Dona Yvonne. Known throughout the neighborhood for resolving problems in unconventional ways, people spoke of her with a blend of respect and apprehension. They said she could orchestrate anything, but nothing came without a price. If you're going to knock on her door, be prepared to pay the price, a neighbor had once warned. But that night, I didn't care. Whatever the cost, I was prepared to pay. The next morning, I went to Dona Yvonne's house. It was a small, secluded house at the end of an alley, with a door that seemed older than time. Upon entering, a potent aroma of herbs and incense almost made me recoil. The walls were adorned with strange objects, antique mirrors, amulets, and images of saints that seemed to observe me. Dona Yvonne sat in a rocking chair, looking at me as if she already knew why I was there. "I know what you want," she said before I could speak. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet there was something about it that made me shiver. I tried to explain, but she interrupted with a gesture. "You desire a different life. You want the wealthy man, isn't that right?" I didn't know how she knew, but I could only nod. She sighed and said that what I sought wasn't simple. This man has a wife. Do you understand what you're asking for? I knew it seemed wrong, but in that moment, I could only focus on how my life could change. I told her I would do anything, that I just needed a chance. She looked at me for a long time before responding. I can help, but you must bring me something from him. A piece of clothing, an object he has used. Without it, I can do nothing. I left her house reeling. How would I obtain such a thing? And more importantly, was I truly willing to pursue this course of action? Deep down, I knew I was. The following day, when Renato entered the store, I decided to act. He selected some clothing, and while we conversed, he mentioned wanting to gift me something as a token of appreciation for my service. It was the perfect opportunity. I feigned reluctance but ultimately accepted. He left a tie with me, something seemingly insignificant to him, but everything to me. I returned to Donna Yvonne's house, the tie clutched in my hands. She took it carefully, murmuring something incomprehensible. "It's done," she finally stated. "But remember, everything has a price." At that moment, I didn't care. My focus was solely on what lay ahead. I hadn't anticipated such rapid change, but after that day, Renato's demeanor shifted. He appeared at the shop the following week, as usual, but this time he seemed more relaxed, almost intimate. He smiled when he saw me and inquired about my well-being. It wasn't a perfunctory question, the kind people ask out of politeness. He genuinely seemed interested. As I attended to him, I noticed his gaze had altered, as if he saw something in me he hadn't before. He made lighthearted remarks about how I seemed more beautiful that week, and I laughed, pretending to be unobservant. But deep down, my heart pounded rapidly. It felt as if the spell was working. Initially, I believed it was all coincidence. Perhaps Renato was naturally kind, or perhaps he merely wished to be polite. But as the days progressed, the truth became clearer. He started frequenting the shop more often, always purchasing seemingly unnecessary items, simply to have an excuse. To converse with me, he inquired about my life, my family, and I, cautiously, provided enough information to sustain his curiosity, but never enough to deter him. I felt as if I were living a fantasy. When Renato complimented me or asked personal questions, it was as if the world around me vanished. I began dreaming of him, but the dreams were unusual. They weren't happy or romantic dreams. They were confusing, filled with images I couldn't comprehend. Shadows, distant voices, a persistent sense that something was amiss. Upon awakening, my heart raced, as if I had just escaped something. In the third week following the spell, Renato did something I never expected. He invited me to have coffee. It was nothing extraordinary, just coffee, he said. But for me, it was everything. It was the first step towards something larger. I accepted, attempting to appear casual, but inside, I was already celebrating. This was the moment I had awaited. Over coffee, we discussed various topics. He shared details about his life, his work, how sometimes he felt things were out of place. I listened intently, searching for a loophole, something I could use to draw closer. He was married, I knew this, but I couldn't help but sense a certain feeling of entrapment within him. Following that encounter, I began to notice changes within myself as well. I felt more confident, as if I were finally taking control of my life. But at the same time, an unease persisted. Sometimes, when alone, I felt as if I were being watched. It was subtle, yet real. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Despite this, everything seemed to be progressing in the right direction. Renato continued to seek me out, and our connection deepened with each passing day. I didn't know if it was the spell or something else, but at that moment, I didn't care. All I desired was to continue along this path, even if, deep down, a part of me sensed something was amiss. I knew things were moving too quickly, but at that moment, it seemed nothing could go wrong. Renato and I began meeting more frequently. He said he enjoyed our conversations, that he felt lighthearted when he was with me. Each encounter reinforced my conviction that I was on the right track. He was everything I had ever dreamed of, elegant, successful, and considerate. I felt special. But things changed when I met Donna Helena, his mother. It was inevitable. Renato invited me to dinner at his home, a significant step. I should have been excited, but as soon as I entered his house, a strange weight settled over me. It was a beautiful mansion, the kind I only saw in magazines, but the atmosphere was cold. The scent of antique furniture mingled with Donna Helena's overpowering perfume, making me nauseous. Donna Helena was a tall woman with eyes sharp as a blade. Upon seeing me, she scrutinized me from head to toe, as if she already knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. "So, you're the young lady from the clothing store?" she said, with a smile. That seemed more like a trap than a gesture of warmth. I forced a smile, attempting to mask my discomfort. Dinner was a trial of endurance. While Renato tried to maintain a light-hearted conversation, Donna Helena peppered me with seemingly innocent questions, but each held a hidden venom. "Have you worked at that shop for long? And your family? What do they do? Haven't you considered further education?" Each word was a reminder that, to her, I would never be good enough. After that dinner, it became evident that Donna Helena did not accept me. Whenever I was at Renato's home, she was sure to appear, her presence marked by indirect comments and disapproving glances. "My son always attracts interesting people," she'd say, emphasizing the last word. Renato would try to defend our relationship, but I knew her influence over him was substantial. Living with Donna Helena began to wear me down. There was something about her that transcended mere disapproval. It was as if she could see through me, as if she knew things I had never confided in anyone. And the more she observed me, the heavier the spell felt. Sometimes when I was alone at Renato's, I felt as if something was following me. A subtle, yet constant sensation, like an unseen presence surrounding me. Renato seemed divided. He remained affectionate, but there were moments when his gaze drifted, as if listening to another voice. I knew Donna Helena was planting seeds of doubt in his mind, and that terrified me. What I hadn't anticipated was that these doubts would begin to take root within me as well. One evening, after an argument with Donna Helena, I returned home and broke down. Her words echoed in my mind. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, girl. My son deserves better." Despite my desire to dismiss it, something about the way she said it struck me. It was as if she knew something I didn't. Despite everything, I didn't want to give up. Renato was my chance to escape the life I had always known, but increasingly I felt this relationship wasn't as perfect as I'd imagined. Donna Helena was a constant presence, like a shadow threatening to extinguish the light I so desperately craved. I knew Donna Helena didn't like me, but I hadn't imagined she could go this far. It began with subtle comments, suspicious glances, and prying questions. But over time, her actions became more direct. She no longer concealed her opinion of me, and Renato, despite his attempts to maintain peace, began to feel pressured. One day, while at Renato's house, something unexpected occurred. I was in his room, organizing some clothes, when I heard voices in the living room. It was Renato and Donna Helena arguing. She said I was unworthy of him, that there was something about me she couldn't trust. "Don't you see that she only wants your money? Women like her don't just appear out of nowhere, Renato," she said, her conviction causing me to tremble. I stood still, trying to listen without being noticed, but something in her tone made me realize this was more than mere suspicion. She seemed to know something. The next day, when I returned to his house, I noticed some items in Renato's room were out of place. Among them, the tie I had given Donna Ivoni for the spell. My heart nearly stopped. How had she gotten it? The answer came that same night. During dinner, Donna Helena, with her cold smile, casually mentioned, "Do you believe in destiny, Larissa? Or do you think love can be forced?" Her question caught me off guard, and before I could respond, she took the tie from her purse and placed it on the table. "Recognize this, dear? I thought you might want it back." Renato looked at me, confused, but before I could say anything, Donna Helena began to speak. She recounted how she found the tie and said she had sought someone to analyze the curious object. According to her, this was the sort of thing desperate. People used to manipulate feelings. I tried to deny it, but my words came out weak. Renato remained silent, but his expression spoke volumes. He was starting to believe. The ensuing argument was a nightmare. Donna Helena wouldn't let me breathe, and Renato, torn between reason and his heart, didn't know what to think. I tried to explain that it was nothing, a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew my lie had reached its limit. When I left that night, it wasn't just Renato who was distant. I felt something else had changed. From that day forward, things began to unravel. Renato started avoiding me, and the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just guilt, there was something more. Sometimes when I was alone, I felt a shadow surrounding me, something unseen but ever present. I couldn't tell you what was worse, Renato's distance, Donna Helena's disdain, or the unsettling feeling that the spell was beginning to exact the price Donna Ivoni had warned about. Everything I had achieved seemed to slip through my fingers, and for the first time, I began to question if I had gone too far. After that night, everything changed. Renato stopped answering my calls, my messages. At first, I thought it was just shock that he needed time to process what had happened. But as the days wore on, it became clear he was pulling away. The most agonizing part was knowing that, despite everything we felt, Donna Helena's words had proven stronger than anything I could say. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't. My job at the store, once a place of potential, now served as a constant reminder of how I had arrived there. Every time someone entered, I found myself staring at the door, hoping it was Renato. But he never came. Each day without news from him was like a knife, slowly carving into me. One night, I decided to go to his house. Perhaps if I could explain myself better, if he could truly hear me, he would understand. But when I arrived, I realized it was too late. The lights were off, and the silence of the house seemed to scream what I already knew. He didn't want to see me. I returned home feeling hollow, as if something inside me had shattered. It wasn't just the loss of Renato that tormented me. It was the accompanying aftermath. Donna Helena's sharp gaze, her cutting. Words continued to echo in my mind. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she had said. Each time I recalled it, a shiver ran through me, as if she had foreseen exactly what would transpire. Sometimes, when alone, I had the unsettling feeling I was being watched, but never saw anyone. Nights became the worst part of my day. Sleep eluded me. When I did finally drift off, I was plagued by disturbing dreams. I saw shadows moving, heard voices I couldn't understand. I awoke drenched in sweat, my heart racing, feeling something was profoundly amiss. I couldn't determine if my mind was playing tricks on me or if there was something more. But one thing was certain: the spell hadn't broken. My relationship with Tiago and my father also began to change. They could sense my distress but didn't know how to help. Tiago, ever concerned, tried to talk to me, but I couldn't speak. How could I explain what was happening? How could I confess that I had thrown my life away for a dream that never should have been mine? The isolation was suffocating. I felt trapped, not just by the situation, but by myself, by my choices. Renato had been my escape route, but now all I had was a void that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. And the most disheartening aspect was the realization that, even if I wanted to, there was no turning back. I began to understand that I was alone, more alone than ever before. And, for the first time, I wondered if this was just the beginning of the price I would have to pay. Reality crashed down with full force. After Renato vanished from my life, everything I had gained began to slip away. It wasn't long before the savings I had meticulously accumulated started to dwindle. The lavish gifts, the expensive dinners, the designer clothes, all seemed so distant now, like they had been part of a different life. I continued working at the store, but nothing was the same. My colleagues noticed the change in me. I no longer bothered to smile at customers, and the compliments I once received held no meaning. What good is beauty if it can't save you? That was the thought that echoed in my head every day. Returning home was even worse. My father and Tiago sensed something was wrong, but I couldn't speak. Tiago tried to pry something from me, saying he was worried, but I could only avert my gaze. He said that whatever it was, we could work through it together. But he didn't understand. How could anyone repair what I had done? Bills piled up, and the pressure at home became unbearable. My father was increasingly weary, and Tiago, who had already given up his tutoring to help, began working double shifts to make up for the shortfall. I felt like a burden, as if my very existence were draining everything around me. The most difficult thing was dealing with the silence. As the world slumbered, I remained awake, staring at the ceiling of my room. My insomnia wasn't solely a product of future anxieties, but a persistent sense of being watched. A palpable weight hung in the air, an inexplicable dread. Occasionally, faint sounds echoed through the house, soft footsteps, doors creaking without apparent cause. I tried to convince myself these were figments of my imagination, but my efforts were futile. One day, returning home, I passed the alley where Donna, Ivone's house, stood. I lacked the courage to enter. Instead, I lingered, gazing at her door. Could she perceive the turmoil within me? Had she anticipated this outcome? The spell had taken hold, but at what cost? I couldn't confront these questions. I simply turned and hurried home. Each passing day, I felt myself being swallowed by something larger than myself. It was as if, in attempting to escape poverty, I had fallen into an even deeper abyss. Worse still, I realized I had no one to blame but myself. Sometimes I replayed my choices, desperately searching for justification. I clung to the notion that I had no other option, that my beauty was the only path the world offered me. But deep down, I knew this was a lie. Perhaps another path existed, but I chose the easiest, the most perilous one. And now, I lived with the consequences. Renato wasn't simply a figure who entered my life. He was my hope for a different existence, a means of escaping poverty and the constraints that confined me. However, in retrospect, I see that I used him as a quick fix. I failed to see Renato as an individual, with his own struggles and emotions. He was merely a symbol, a representation of what I believed I needed. This realization pains me more than anything. My brother Tiago still tries to help me. He encourages me to study, to pursue a different path. Yet I question my own capacity. I doubt my ability to start anew, to deserve a fresh beginning. Tiago, unaware of the full extent of my situation, maintains his faith in me more than I have, in myself. This is a suffocating weight, for I know he expected more from me. The nights are the most challenging. When quiet descends, my thoughts assail me with renewed vigor. It's as if the shadows within my mind take on a life of their own, relentlessly reminding me of my past mistakes. Sometimes I close my eyes and see Renato's eyes, not the eyes that once held affection, but the ones that met mine at the end, filled with doubt and disappointment. This gaze haunts me. The work at the store has become an unbearable routine. Each customer entering seems to carry a piece of my shame, a constant reminder of how far I've fallen. Once, I dreamt of expensive clothes and exquisite perfumes. Now, they serve only as painful reminders of what I've lost. It's as if I live within a nightmare of my own creation. I considered returning to Dona Yvonne's house, but something held me back. I'm unsure if it's fear or pride. She warned me that everything has a price, but I refused to heed her words. Now I understand her meaning. The price isn't just what you pay in the present. It's the ongoing toll it takes on your life, day after day, as you realize there's no undoing what's been done. Ultimately, I believe the most agonizing aspect is the knowledge that I could have been different. Tiago always told me I was capable, that life shouldn't be defined by limitations. But I disregarded his words. I chose the shortest, most perilous path. Now all that remains is this inescapable remorse. Today, I have only one certainty. What I did was wrong. There's no other way to put it. But knowing this doesn't change anything. What has happened, and the past cannot be erased. All I can do now is try to move forward, even though the weight of my actions will always accompany me. I wish I could say that all of this is behind me, that things have changed, and that somehow I have found liberation. But I would be lying. Despite my efforts to move on, I sense an enduring entanglement, something that refuses to vanish. It's as if the spell has left an indelible mark, a trail I cannot erase. At night, matters intensify. When silence reigns, I hear sounds that shouldn't be there. Soft footsteps in the hallway, the creaking of a door I know I closed before bed. These aren't loud noises, but they're enough to disrupt my sleep. And when I dare to get up to investigate, I find nothing. Only an emptiness that feels heavier than usual. My dreams persist. They visit me nearly every night, always featuring the same images, moving shadows, whispering voices, uttering words I cannot understand. Sometimes I awaken in the middle of the night with a racing heart, feeling as if someone has just left the room. I look around, but there's no one there. Still, I can't shake the conviction that I'm not alone. I considered returning to Dona Yvonne's house to seek answers, but something holds me back. Perhaps it's the fear of what she might reveal. Or maybe, deep down, I already know the answer. The price she mentioned, the one I initially disregarded, isn't something settled once and for all. It lingers, like an unpayable debt. During the day, I manage to distract myself. The work at the shop, though stifling, keeps me occupied. But as night descends, everything returns. The silence becomes oppressive, and the shadows seem to take on a life of their own. I'm unsure if it's my own guilt manifesting, or if something truly is amiss with me. Regardless, the sensation is palpable, and it refuses to depart. Sometimes, I wonder if Renato experiences anything similar. Does he also have unsettling dreams? Does he sense that something is out of place? I'll never know. He's distant now, beyond my reach. But if the spell has left its mark on me, it's hard to believe he escaped completely unscathed. I have no idea what the future holds for me. I try not to dwell on it, because the truth is, I lack the strength to formulate grand plans. All I can do is survive, one day at a time, while this feeling of being watched continues to haunt me. No matter where I am, I feel a constant sense of not being alone. And remember, evil never stays far away. It always finds its way back.